Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ground and Pound podcast, the show where, as always, we're hitting you with them elbows of knowledge. And PFL Tampa is here, Cyborg versus Vieira in the main event. And you know what to do if you're enjoying the content. Hit that like and subscribe button, share the video if you haven't already. We've got UFC, we've got PFL this week, and Carlos's breakdowns are in, man. So let's dive right into this 12-fight stacked PFL card, a pretty good one over in Tampa. And without further ado, let's dive right in to the early prelim opener. And currently the bout kicking off PFL Tampa. We've got Florim Ndebele taking on Omran Shaban. And both of these guys, when you look at them, very similar in height, reach, experience. And I think this fight's really going to come down to the intangibles. And one of the things that I really picked up on tape study this week between these two guys, both of them like to be able to stand and trade. Both of them like to be able to utilize grappling and utilize, underhooks against the fence, dragging their opponent to the ground. Both guys have a submission game. Both guys are able to strike, but they really utilize different weapons. And I think this fight's really going to come down to two things for me, which is why I'm going to pick Ndebele. I've seen with Ndebele that he can tough out bad scenarios. I've seen him hurt. I've seen him dropped. I've seen him being able to shoot in for takedowns and consistently not give up on himself. And I think that gritty approach is going to serve him well against this matchup here against Shaban, because in a lot of Shaban's matchups, I haven't necessarily seen him have to kind of bite down on his mouthpiece and really go for it in a fight. He does have good submissions. He has a very nice calf kick. And I do think, when it comes to his overall ground game, he's probably the better submission artist. The only difference is to me is that I think Ndebele, he's probably the better positional wrestler. And I do think on the feet, he probably carries a little bit more power and speed. So this fight's really just going to come down to who can I rely on that's going to be able to tough out bad scenarios in a fight. And to me, that's going to be Ndebele. I've seen in a lot of fights, he does get touched up on the feet. He will give one to kind of get one. And I think both guys lack a lot of defense on the feet. They do carry their chin a little bit tall. But I do think with Ndebele that he is the tougher, more grittier fighter. And I think that's going to serve him well here against Shaban. I think if the fight hits the mat, I can trust Ndebele to kind of be the one on top, controlling where this fight takes place. And I think on the feet, he hits that little bit harder. So I think in the exchanges, he's going to have the bigger moments that are going to be sort of in the eyes of the judges in order for him to win rounds. So I'm going to go with Ndebele here. I do think this is a very close fight. I did take a look at the odds for this one after I did my breakdown, and I will say the odds kind of reflect exactly what I'm seeing here, where Ndebele is a slight favorite. But I do think Shaban has room for an upset here. He has very nice guillotines. He will jump for a guillotine at times, which I think will be a bad decision here against a guy like Ndebele that has good submission defense. And I do think on the feet, Ndebele should have the advantage when it comes to the power. And I do think Shaban, his low calf kick is definitely going to be a good weapon against Ndebele. Ndebele is vulnerable to calf kicks, but I do think at times Shaban can kind of enter the pocket a little bit recklessly, where Ndebele's nice push kick and teep kick that he has is going to be able to really poke and prod the midsection of Shaban here. But I'm going to rely on the fact that I think Ndebele is going to be the tougher, more grittier fighter. I think he's the slightly better wrestler, and I think he's going to have the bigger moments on the feet utilizing his power shots. So give me Florim Ndebele here to kick off PFL Tampa. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
In this fight, I'm going to go with Florim Ndebele to get it done. And Ndebele, he's more of a pressure fighter. He's going to want to walk you forward, make you exchange, create those opportunities for takedowns. Shaban mixes his punches and kicks very well, keeps fighter range. But when you're fighting a guy that's a similar height, similar reach, the advantages that you usually have, he's going to take that away from you. And you're not going to really know how to deal with that. This may be the first time Shaban has to deal with that. I'm going to have to go with Ndebele. Once this goes to the ground, the top control, he can implement some ground and pound, looking for submissions and burn the clock. But standing, I think Ndebele is going to offer some problems standing. I think he's going to use that long reach, those long kicks. And Shaban, he offers the same thing, but he's not used to seeing that. I think Ndebele is. I think he's fought guys of pressure a little bit more. I also think he's fought the better competition. So Ndebele to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Ian Sheridan taking on James Vake. I'm pretty high on Sheridan as a prospect here in the PFL. Obviously only 5 professional bouts, but he is a very well-rounded and a real problem fighter for a lot of 170-pounders. At 6'5", with an 81-inch reach, he does a good job of utilizing those tools, unlike a lot of tall fighters that we see in professional mixed martial arts. And I think that James Vake here is another stepping stone, another victory for him in this matchup here to kind of rise his stock in the PFL. And let's talk about Vake a little bit. Obviously, coming off of a 2-year layoff, they put him in there with Elder Frowie in his last fight, and he got knocked out early in the first round, pretty viciously. And he does train out of City Kickboxing. He's primarily a kickboxer overall. On the regional scene, he hasn't fought the best level of competition. You'd really have to look closely in order to find a guy that's actually got a winning record out of the victories that he does have on the regional scene. He's very measured on the feet. He does tend to leave that front leg out there to kind of be chewed up by calf kicks. And I do think in this matchup here that even though he does have good takedown defense, which you expect out of City Kickboxing, I don't expect it to be enough in order to be able to survive on the ground against a big, athletic Sheridan at 6'5". I just think that Sheridan's far too well-rounded, and I do think this is another stepping stone. It feels kind of like a lamb to the slaughter, another guy to be able to give Sheridan a little bit more experience. And when you talk about Sheridan's overall MMA game, what I really like is his ability to be able to blast kicks out at range. He does a good job of, if he wants to circle on the outside or plant his feet in the middle, he still keeps a distance that is suitable for him. He makes you fight at his range, and the whole time he's blasting the low kick, he's chewing up that calf, which is definitely a weapon I could see him using here against James Vake, as it is there to be hit. I do think as well he needs to be able to utilize a lot of attacks to the body. He does a good job of being able to blast those kicks to the body and the head out at range. But what he'll do is once his opponent kind of gets frustrated with being poked and prodded by kicks and they enter the pocket, that's when he looks to counter with the hands. He'll step in with a right hand, or he'll step in with that nice jab and really utilize the leverage that he has in a lot of those shots with that long reach. And I do think that Sheridan as well, you know, you look at him and you think, well, he's a good striker, but can he grapple? And he's demonstrated in fights that he has good jiu-jitsu. He can sub you. He can scramble. He has good wrestling as well. So I think he's a real problem in this division. I do think, like I said, that he should be able to find the finish here against James Vake. I'm going to say he finds the knockout here. I do think that Vake's takedown defense is going to give Sheridan a little bit of problems, but I do think out at range, those kicks are going to be a real issue for Vake. I think he's going to get his calf chewed up like we saw in the Mixon fight for Sheridan in his last performance. And I think that those kicks here are going to be his downfall, and that's really going to open up the hands. I think that Vake is going to get frustrated, getting poked and prodded out at range. I think that he's going to end up having to, defend takedowns. And I think at some point he's going to enter the pocket recklessly, and Sheridan's going to be able to time sort of a counter straight right, or be able to land some sort of power jab that's going to really put Vake down and be the beginning of the end. Sheridan might get on top and end up going for a submission or ground and pound, but ultimately I see Sheridan getting his hand raised by some sort of, whether it be a sub or whether it be a knockout. I see him getting the finish here, and I think he gets another victory here to go 6-0. And he's a nice prospect. I like him here, and I think he should be a big favorite for a reason, and I think he gets this one done here at PFL Tampa. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to go with Sheridan to get it done, and I think Sheridan's going to be the busier fighter of the two. I feel that defensively, he will have the reach advantage, use his footwork to stay moving, keep the fight at range. Although Sheridan loops his punches, he's going to be the faster fighter. He's going to get to the target quicker. Has good takedown defense. His height and his length is going to cause problems in the grappling department. When it comes to wrestling, it's going to make it difficult for him to take down. So, Sheridan to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Gino Van Steenis taking on Robert Watley. And Robert Watley coming off of that first round knockout. I think this is a bad matchup here against Van Steenis. Van Steenis, a very technical kickboxer, very big for 155 at 6'1". And let's face it, coming off of that last performance against Mark Ewing, I think the writing is kind of on the wall and what I see in this matchup here against Watley. Watley, 36 years old, getting knocked out in the first round against Dakota Bush in his last matchup, kind of spells the beginning of the end of his career, in my opinion. And I think we're going to see Van Steenis find the knockout here, as I do believe he's a much more technical kickboxer, or at least a better striker than what Dakota Bush is. Steenis is very big and carries a ton of power, but he's not necessarily utilizing his power. It's more his ability to be able to set up those shots. And we saw that in that Mark Ewing performance. He was able to time that right hand when Ewing entered the pocket recklessly. He was able to slip out the way and counter with that right hand, which put Ewing out. And let's face it, Robert Watley at 36 years old, the smaller guy, he's going to look to grapple and wrestle. once Steenis is having success defending the takedowns, it's going to force Robert Watley to stand and trade with Steenis on the feet, where Van Steenis is much better than he is. Robert Watley is a good fighter. There is no doubt about that. He's obviously got a ton of experience, much more than Van Steenis, but I think this is going to just be a case of, old lion, new lion. It's going to be a case of a guy that at 36 years old is kind of going towards the end or the latter stages of his career, where he's taken damage in his last previous fight, and he's now coming up against a guy who is an up-and-coming fighter with a lot of power, who trains with the current champion in his brother as well. And I do think in this matchup here, he should have enough success early in the fight to be able to at least wear down Watley to the point where his takedowns are going to be labored. He's going to be hurt to the body. He's going to have his low calf chewed up as the fight progresses, which are really going to impact his ability to be able to kind of level change and have an explosive takedown against Van Steenis. And I do think that, he might have a success early kind of getting Van Steenis up against the fence and kind of wearing on him. But I think Van Steenis' takedown defense and his overall ability up against the fence are going to be good enough to kind of get back to space where he's going to have success on the feet. So even though I do think Robert Watley is very dangerous, he's a guy that could push a pace, he's a guy that could really put it on you in the PFL, I think Gino Van Steenis is far too much for him on the feet. I think he's got too much power, and I think he can catch Watley coming in. So give me Gino Van Steenis here to get this one done. I'm going to say get it done by second round knockout. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to go with Gino Van Steenis to get this one done. And I hate to give a short breakdown, but I just see Van Steenis being able to pretty much out-physical and bully Watley with the size, the aggression, and the skill advantage. Not exactly the same as Costello, but he's getting there. He's getting better every time he's in the ring. He's getting smarter. His IQ's getting better. But he can hit, and he brings the aggression, he brings the power, and I feel that Watley's there to be hit. I don't think Watley can get this fight to the mat if he wanted to. Even if he did, I don't think he can control Van Steenis, and I don't think he can handle the firepower coming back at him. So Gino Van Steenis to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Natan Schulte taking on Makkasharip Zaynukov. Give me Zaynukov in this one. I think this is going to be a tough matchup for Schulte, because if you look at Schultz's best work, he wants to be able to get you in the clinch, back you up against the fence, and really utilize his takedowns up against the cage. The problem is in this matchup is that I think Zaynukov is going to be the better wrestler out of that Habib camp, obviously from Dagestan, and that's going to allow him to be able to dictate where this fight takes place. Schulte on the feet, he is a very big, stocky guy, but the problem is that where he does his best work is in that grappling and in that top control once he takes you to the ground. He's got excellent submissions, good back takes, nice arm triangle setups, but when it comes to this, kind of the stand-up era of MMA, I think that's where he really tends to struggle. I think guys who have a nice stiff jab that, kind of keep things very simple in the striking are going to be able to get the better of him, especially later in fights when he starts to get tired from that early aggressive pursuit of the takedowns. And I think that's exactly what Zaynukov is. He's a guy that when you look at Zaynukov's overall sort of body of work, he has kind of faced a lot of criticism of him not being able to get finishes in fights. And I think that because of that, he is able to drag fights into deep waters, but he keeps things very simple, especially on the feet. He will attack the low kick, which is going to be a great weapon here for being able to take some of that explosive takedowns away from Schulte. I think as well on the feet, Schulte, especially when he gets tired later in fights in the second and third round, will lack a little bit of head movement. And I think that Zaynukov jab is going to be a real weapon for him, that he doesn't necessarily just use it in order to find range. He's really snapping the head backs of a lot of his opponents. And once he kind of pumps out that jab a few times, he follows it up with a straight right hand. And he does a good job of just staying fundamental with those three weapons. And right when you kind of think it's going to be a standing kickboxing affair where you're eating jabs and eating straight rights and calf kicks, that's when Zaynukov level changes on you and mixes in his own grappling and his own wrestling. So I think Zaynukov here is the right side. I like him to get this one done. I do think he's going to be able to dictate where the fight takes place. And I think for Schulte, you only have to go back and look at his last performance against Kazuba, where he came out very aggressive. He got 6 takedowns early in round 1. He didn't have the control, and Kazuba was able to get back to his feet. And that caused Schulte to be getting so tired that in the second and third round, he didn't really have a lot to offer. And I think Zaynukov is built for a 3-round fight. He's a guy that builds as the fight goes on. And I do think on the feet, Zaynukov should have the advantage. He does throw those main weapons that I talked about very hard, and I think that they're going to end up wearing on Schulte as the fight goes on. And I could see, Kazuba doing a good job of actually mixing in some shots to the body to even kind of gas Schulte a little bit sooner. And I could see him even utilizing his own grappling up against the fence early in the fight, reversing positions, and then, really leaning on Schulte to kind of get him tired early. So I do think this is a tough matchup for Natan Schulte here. I think you have to go with Zaynukov here. So I'm going to say he wins by decision. I think that, even though he does need to look for a finish, I do think that Schulte is a very tough guy. He's not a guy that's easy to put out. And I do think that Zaynukov here is just going to basically point fight his way in the middle of the cage, utilizing that jab and that low kick. And then in the grappling, he's going to keep it upright, utilizing his grappling and his wrestling. So give me Makkasharip Zaynukov here to get this one done by unanimous decision. Feel confident in him this week. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to go with Natan Schulte to get it done, and I feel that Schulte is the more complete fighter of the two. I feel that he can have success anywhere the fight takes place. He's not a big puncher, but he does pressure his opponent. And in the clinch, the only thing I'm really worried about is him closing the distance for Zaynukov to get the takedowns. And the only reason I'm worried about that is I don't think that Zaynukov is going to be able to submit him. I just think that Schulte might just play jiu-jitsu off of his back instead of showing a sense of urgency and getting up, because in the eyes of the judges, you can throw up 20 submissions, but if you don't get one, that doesn't count as you like winning the fight and being the active fighter. Just because of ring generalship, it looks like Zaynukov is in control. It looks like he's actually controlling you on the ground. So if he can avoid going down, or if he's down, get into a better position, maybe side control, hopefully top control, or use some of those submissions to sweep, get back to his feet, I feel that he can do that. So Zaynukov, good wrestling. He could take him down and just control him if Natan Schulte plays jiu-jitsu off of his back. I don't see that happening. I see Schulte being able to stuff some of those takedowns. If he gets taken down, hopefully using his submissions to sweep. So Natan Schulte to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Dakota Bush taking on Marquez Forrest. Forrest obviously making his PFL debut here on short notice. Dakota Bush coming off of a first round knockout to Robert Watley with an impressive overhand right. And Dakota Bush here, I feel like you should get this one done. Forrest is not necessarily a bad opponent, not necessarily somebody you should take lightly, but I do think Dakota Bush's experience is going to show in this matchup. When you talk about Dakota Bush, obviously 20 professional bouts, he is a well-rounded fighter. He's got power in the hands, which we obviously saw in his last performance. He does have nice, tight, crisp striking, and I do think in this matchup, he might utilize his grappling and his submission game. He has nice back control. He does a good job of staying positionally sound if the fight hits the mat, and I think that Forrest, even though he is a good athlete, taking this fight on short notice, it's really going to wear on him if Dakota Bush decides to come in here and grapple and wrestle. I have seen a good sprawl out of Forrest. His takedown defense looks respectable, but it's not necessarily against the best level of guys. And I do think if you compare resumes of both of these guys' previous opponents, I do think that the Bush is going to come out on top in this one. I think if you look at Forrest's overall skill set, he stands southpaw. He can be a little bit trigger shy at times, not necessarily letting his hands go. But when he does, he is reasonably explosive. He carries some real power. And you can see that from, his build and his overall ability to come into fights in shape. In this matchup, I think Dakota Bush is going to come out and strike with him early. I think he's going to be able to, kind of land some shots and kind of let Forrest kind of get a feeler into the fight. Bush is going to kind of get a feeler for the first round. And then in the second round, he's going to come out and utilize some grappling. And I think he's going to be able to find the submission in this one. I think that his overall skill set and his pedigree in terms of who he's fought inside of MMA is much higher than what Forrest is. And I think he's going to be, coming off of a first round victory inside of the first round, getting a high, really impact knockout. I think he's going to want to keep that momentum rolling as well. So coming out and maybe showing off some grappling, I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. And I do think that Forrest, realistically, taking this fight on short notice, he carries a ton of power. And, by wrestling, it's going to build up that lactic acid in Forrest's arms. It's going to take away some of that power, take away some of the threat. And I think ultimately it's going to lead to Bush being able to take the back and find the rear naked choke. So give me Dakota Bush here to get this one done. I do think Forrest is a nice addition to the PFL, but on short notice against a more experienced guy in Dakota Bush, I think he's going to fall short here. So give me Dakota Bush to get this one done by sub. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to go with Dakota Bush to get it done. And I think Bush is going to have to pressure Forrest, stay in his face, clinch against the cage, make him have to grind, fish for underhooks, threaten takedowns. And if you get it, land some ground and pound. Pull on the back of his head. Drape yourself over him. Make him carry your weight, because Forrest is physically imposing. Likes to walk his opponents down, use his strength, use his power, use some more boxing. He just looks to be the stronger, more athletic of the two. And when you're walking forward, everything's easy. That means everything's going at your pace. What Dakota Bush needs to do, push the pace, make him go backwards, make him retreat, because when you're thinking going backwards, thinking offensively, defensively, having to problem solve at the same time, that's fatiguing. That's what's going to push the pace for you. That's what's going to make this hectic. So Dakota Bush, I think he can do that, and I think he can get this one done. If he can get him up against the cage, impose himself on him, throw some strikes, pick up the pace, and I think that's going to be the key for him to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Movsar Ibragimov taking on Javid Basharat. And if you're enjoying the content, hit that like and subscribe button. And I'm going with the upset here. Give me Ibragimov to get this one done. I've never been high on the Basharat brothers, and I do think that Javid is definitely the worser out of the two. And let's start off with his overall skill set here. Obviously, Basharat, he does come into a lot of fights utilizing both striking and grappling. Did obviously make his UFC debut off the Contender Series by third round guillotine. And he is a decent fighter. I'm not trying to take anything away from his overall skill set. He utilizes spinning attacks with the kicks. He'll chop at the low calf kick. He will mix things up on the feet, utilizing his boxing as well. He will look to mix in takedowns and get top control and utilize his grappling. But the problem to me is that he's just not very dangerous. And I think the problem with a lot of fights is that when you're not able to finish opponents, you always give them opportunities, as we saw in the Ricky Simone fight, to be able to actually knock you out. And shout out to local man Shakes Fist, one of our longtime subscribers, for his picture of Basharat getting knocked out in that Ricky Simone fight. I remember that every time I think of Javid Basharat. But it's one of those things where it's like Basharat is not a guy that is extremely dangerous. And I just worry in a lot of matchups where he could be having success, he could be landing in volume, he could be winning rounds, and then all of a sudden he leaves his chin exposed, gets caught by a guy that's much more athletic, much more faster, and just doesn't have a whole lot to offer. And that's the point where he gets caught, and that's ultimately how his UFC run ended, where he was beating guys he should beat. But the problem was when he came up against guys that carried power, that could wrestle, the way fights were very competitive, he didn't have that stopping power to be able to get the respect. And ultimately his chin was the ultimate tester when it came to that Ricky Simone knockout. But in this matchup here against Ibragimov, I do think he is well-rounded. I think that he's very competitive. I just want to see what the odds are looking like for this one, because I think Basharat's going to end up being a big favorite, and I don't really understand why. When you look at Ibragimov, formerly out of Dagestan, I believe it's either Dagestan or Chechnya, but his wrestling base is very, very good. If you look at his overall body of work, his ability to be able to get you to the ground, whether it's, on the feet, kind of mixing things up and then level changing, or even if it's up against the fence, his ability to be able to get you to the ground is second to none. He has very good top control. He's got great submissions. He's got a nasty das. He's got a great guillotine. And we've even seen him pull off the Von Flu as well over in the PFL. And obviously that one lone loss did come against Oliveira, but Oliveira looks like a real prospect inside of the PFL, so no shame in losing in that fight. And in my opinion, he was getting the better of Oliveira with those takedowns as well, up until he did get submitted. He was able to get Oliveira down kind of at will, but I just worry here that Basharat is going to kind of play it off like, I'm the guy that was in the UFC, I'm the big entity here, and kind of take Ibragimov lightly, because I actually think Movsar Ibragimov is actually one of my favorite fighters in the PFL, and he has fantastic submissions, but on the feet, he does a good job of really slaying the right hand straight down the pipe, looking to counter. He has decent striking, and I think that he is the more natural finisher. I think on the feet, he can definitely play spoiler here. I think he's more athletic and faster to the target, and I think he has a little bit more in terms of, having to get Basharat to worry about the takedown, which is going to open up the hands here of Ibragimov. And I think that Basharat is not going to be able to have enough when it comes to actually getting the respect of Ibragimov to actually offer him anything that Ibragimov's not going to be worried about. I don't see Ibragimov getting guillotined by Basharat like he did on the Contender Series. I just don't really see what he's going to be able to do here. So give me Movsar Ibragimov here to get this one done. I think it's going to be a unanimous decision. I think he's going to be the one that's going to have enough top control against Basharat. I think Basharat's going to work back to his feet. He's going to get taken down again. He's going to throw spinning attacks, and I think that's going to ultimately lead to Ibragimov being able to take him down. And I think on the feet, Basharat, even though he does have some nice attacks, whether that be in the boxing, whether that be the spinning kicks, I just think Ibragimov is going to have a moment where he's going to be the one landing the bigger shot, which is going to cause Basharat to shoot in for takedowns himself, which could cause Ibragimov to then be able to get his submission game going as well, cause the sweep, allow him to get on top. So either way, I see Ibragimov being able to pull this one off as the more dangerous finisher. Give me Movsar, Ibragimov here to get this one done. In play spoiler for this PFL debut here for Javid Basharat. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to have to go with Javid Basharat to get it done. And Basharat has good movement, sharp striking, and more volume on the feet. Needs to keep the fight at striking range. Make Ibragimov chase him. Make it difficult to close the distance, because Ibragimov's only path to victory is to use the wrestling and implement his ground game. But Basharat, he can't make it easy to get the takedowns. Ibragimov's going to have to use his striking, close the distance, and that is where Basharat will unload on him, is when he gets in striking range. And Basharat is well versed in submissions, and if Ibragimov gets him down and that's his only way to victory, I feel that Basharat is probably going to be the one able to get the submission finish if he gets down there, but he's going to use more ground and pound in that situation. I feel that Basharat has more ways to win. I feel that he's a little bit more well-rounded. I feel that he's the more complete fighter of the two, so Javid Basharat to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Magomedov taking on Daniel Marcos. Obviously, UFC fans will remember the 18-1 Daniel Marcos, the 5-1 inside of the UFC Daniel Marcos. Very interesting to me, obviously, that the PFL have picked him up. Not sure why. Obviously, he was having a ton of success inside of the UFC, working heavily on his grappling. That was the thing I really picked up on him in the latter stages of his UFC run. That when you look at the Dontel Jackson fight, he came out and really looked to grapple and wrestle in that matchup. And I don't know whether that's because he was worried about the power of Jackson and he wanted to kind of wear on the gas tank, if it was because he wanted to get away from his kickboxing and ultimately utilize some grappling and wrestling that he'd been working on. And in his previous bout, obviously, where he was able to get the submission victory over Miles Johns, he then got cut after that fight. So it's a little bit interesting to see how Marcos comes in here to the PFL and what Daniel Marcos we're going to get, because in his early run, he was having a lot of success on the feet as a real dangerous striker. He was giving people a lot of problems. He has a really nice step-in knee to the body that we see at times from guys who do a good job of kind of crashing into the pocket and really attacking that liver with the knee. He's got excellent boxing. He's got really nice kicks. He can put up a ton of volume. He's got a good chin. He's got good cardio base. And then he mixes in the grappling and the wrestling as well now. So it's really interesting to see what kind of Daniel Marcos shows up here. So in this matchup here against Magomedov, I'd like to see the early days Marcos show up, the one that wanted to utilize his kickboxing and his excellent takedown defense. Because Magomedov, we know, Dagestani-style wrestler that can really push a pace with a heavy grappling approach. That's kind of the fight that I think that Marcos has been fighting recently. So if he comes in here very similar to his last few fights, I think that's going to play into the hands of Magomedov. If he comes in here and decides to stand and trade in a kickboxing realm, I think that he's going to be the more sort of faster, more athletic striker with more weapons on the feet. And I think obviously if you go look at Magomedov's last previous fights, there's no secret that he is kind of a little bit of a step slow to the Magomedov that we've seen previously over in Bellator and kind of in his younger days. Still, Magomedov has a lot to offer. He still has fantastic wrestling. He's still got excellent submission defense. He can still put up a ton of numbers, and he is a very gritty fighter that's got a lot of experience and only really loses to the best of the best guys. So in this matchup, I'm going to go with Magomedov, and I think it's really tough. And the reason for that is because I could see Daniel Marcos coming in here and utilizing a grappling-heavy approach again. And the problem with that is, like I said earlier, is that it's going to play into the hands of Magomedov. It's going to allow Magomedov to get to his wrestling and his grappling. I think that Marcos is going to play into that. And I think that's going to allow Magomedov to be able to get some sort of takedown or top control or clinch up against the fence, which is really going to slow down Marcos. The problem is that on the feet, I do think Marcos is going to be more dangerous, but he's not necessarily the most dynamic or crazy striker that's got this, kind of one-shot power that Magomedov's seen in the past. So I think because of Magomedov's kind of experience and who he's seen in the past and who he's lost to, I think that he's going to be, very grappling heavy in this fight, which I think Marcos is going to play into. So because of that, I'm going to go with Magomedov here to get this one done. Not super confident because I do think Marcos could play spoiler if he comes in here and decides to strike. He could definitely put up a ton of volume like he did in that Davy Grant fight. And I think that if he comes in here and does that and defends the takedowns and gets to space, he could definitely be the much better striker in this matchup with more weapons and more tools in a kind of aging, slowing Magomedov here. So I am going to go with Magomedov. Not super confident, Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, on this one, I'm going to take Daniel Marcos to get it done. I think Marcos has too much skill, too fight of a high fight IQ. I think Marcos is defensively sound. I don't see Magomedov getting the best of him anywhere, even on the feet and the boxing and the kickboxing. Wrestling, I think he's going to struggle to get the takedowns against Marcos on the mat. I think he's going to struggle to keep him down. If he does get the takedowns, Marcos, I think he's just too comfortable in the cage. He's too relaxed. He's got good vision. He can see everything coming defensively. He can see the strikes coming at him. He sees the attacks coming before they're there, especially somebody like Magomedov. Even though he's got some high-level wrestling, I think Marcos has enough to keep this fight standing and punish him on the feet. So Daniel Marcos to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Marcirley Alvarez taking on Nkosi Ndebele. Ndebele obviously taking this fight on short notice with about a week's notice, replacing Oliveira. Coming off that Brandon Davis victory, I thought he looked pretty good in that fight. Very technical kickboxing, has a ton of volume, demonstrated that he will wrestle if needed. And when he gets on top, he is vicious, looking for ground and pound in order to try to get you out of there. And I think in this matchup against Alvarez, it's actually a very good stylistic matchup for Ndebele. The one thing that I don't like about Alvarez's game is that he wants to be able to plant and really look to stand and trade with you in the pocket. The problem is he's very gun shy and very low volume at times. Only 5'4" with a 67-inch reach. He needs to be able to kind of stand and plant his feet in the pocket and land big shots. And the problem here against Ndebele is that at 5'10" with a 6-inch reach advantage, he is going to be able to kind of poke and prod from the outside. And we saw in his last fight that he's got some really good long-range tools. He'll utilize kicks at range, attacking the low calf kick, which is definitely going to be present, and Alvarez, who stands very flat-footed, wanting to be able to land big bombs. And the problem here as well is that Ndebele is going to be able to poke and prod and not necessarily have the pace pushed, which on short notice is what we tend to see fighters do who are on the full camp. Alvarez is the guy that's usually the one having the pace pushed against him. Guys like to be able to throw a ton of volume at him, kind of knowing that they're going to get ahead, as he's not a guy that's going to throw a ton of volume back. They just have to be mindful of the power, whereas Ndebele is a guy who he will throw a ton of volume, he will mix in takedowns. I just could see Ndebele pulling off the upset here, and you have to believe that he feels confident stepping in on short notice here, that he's going to have the cardio to last all 3 rounds. He must have stayed in shape from that previous victory that he had a few weeks ago. Stepping in here, give me Nkosi Ndebele on short notice to pull off the upset. I think that he's going to have more volume. I think he's going to be able to mix in not only takedowns to kind of stall out with Alvarez, but he showed that he's a decent grappler once he gets on top. And I think that Alvarez, mindful of his guillotine, I just don't really think that he's going to have a whole lot for him outside of a big punishing shot on the feet or maybe some sort of surprise guillotine if Ndebele decides to shoot in for a takedown. So give me Nkosi Ndebele here to get this one done with the volume, with the kicks at range on short notice. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to have to go with Marcirley Alves to get it done. And, you know, I was looking forward to him versus Gustavo Oliveira, but now he's going to be fighting Ndebele, excuse me. And Ndebele, he's good. He's a good fighter. I just don't think he's at the level of Alves. Alves is, I think, a little bit more aggressive on the feet. He's going to mix in the grappling in this one because there are some advantages for Ndebele when it comes to the striking and the standing. But I don't think he's going to be able to keep up with the pace of Alves. I don't think he's going to be able to throw anything to hurt him. I think Alves is going to walk through a couple of the strikes. It is short notice, and Ndebele, I don't think he's going to be out of shape. I think he's going to be ready to go, not for the pace that he wants to keep, but he's going to have to find something to slow down Alves, and I don't think he has anything to slow him down. I think if obviously he can land a shot down the middle and probably slow him down and hurt him, or a shot to the body or a kick or something, but it's going to be more of a lucky shot, and Alves is going to walk through a lot of those. He's going to land a couple of shots he wants to in close quarters. He's going to take him down, probably be able to ground and pound him a little bit. That's the shooter box way. They don't look for the takedowns. They're looking for punishment, and I think he's going to be able to punish Ndebele on the feet, so and the pace he's going to keep. So Marcirley Alves to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Luke Trainer taking on Roland Dunlap. Let's start off with Dunlap, a 3-time All-American wrestler, but you wouldn't be able to tell that from the fighting style that he presents to you when you do your tape study. 7-0 professionally, but it is coming against some very low-level competition, guys with, kind of 50-50 records, losing records over on the regional scene. But Dunlap's fighting style is very unique. It's very unorthodox on the feet. He's throwing like Superman look-away punches. He's not necessarily utilizing and shooting in for takedowns with that wrestling pedigree, and it kind of makes for a really difficult read on his overall fighting style. He has some very nice flashy kicks. He could definitely land on anybody at any given moment, but the problem here is that I think if you lack that much defense against a higher level guy in Luke Trainer, I think at some point you're going to get found out. Luke Trainer obviously coming off of his best professional victory against Rob Wilkinson in his last fight with that first round guillotine. A lot of people weren't, kind of expecting Luke Trainer to be able to pull that one off against Rob Wilkinson. But I do think that Trainer, not only on the feet but on the ground, should be able to get this one done. He keeps a nice tight high guard when he's standing there on the feet, utilizing his kickboxing. He should have the height and reach advantage in this matchup, and he fights like a tall fighter. He knows that he wants to be able to get fights to the ground and utilize his submission game, but on the feet he keeps it very simple. He just touches with the jab and then throws out the 1-2. In exchanges where people bring their hands down, he does carry a lot of power because he's not necessarily putting everything into his punches. Because of that height and reach, he can really generate a lot of power with that 6'6" frame. And I think when he hurts people, he knows that he has such a good submission game and he is so good on top that he really takes his time in the kind of the finishing sequences and doesn't rush, throwing wild ground and pound. He gets into a dominant position on the ground where he knows that he can keep that position and then land more effective strikes to soften you up for a guillotine or soften you up for an anaconda or any sort of submission that he feels that he can get in that moment. I think Trainer is the rightful side here. I think he should come in, really look to push Dunlap up against the fence. I think that's how he's going to have success here. With an unorthodox style, sometimes just slowing down the fight and just kind of getting the fight where you want to be and where you're most comfortable is probably going to give you the most success. So I'd like to see Trainer kind of keep the fight simple on the feet, back up Dunlap, get him up against the fence, utilize some dirty boxing, utilize some foot stomps and some knees to the thigh, and then drag this fight to the ground and get into a dominant position where you can be the more dominant force on the ground. Don't get me wrong, I do expect Dunlap's, wrestling pedigree to be able to defend the takedowns of Luke Trainer, but I think once it gets kind of to the ground where Trainer can be in a dominant position, I think that's where he's going to shine with the big elbows, soften him up for ground and pound and find another submission victory. So give me Luke Trainer here to get this one done. I don't like the level of competition for Dunlap, and I do think Luke Trainer, this is probably a step down in competition after that Rob Wilkinson victory. So I think Trainer comes in here, makes a statement, finds another submission victory. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to go with Luke Trainer to get it done. And I think Dunlap has solid wrestling. He's a 3-time All-American, looks comfortable on his feet. He has a wide base, stance kind of like a karate stance. He probes his lead hand, controlling the distance of his opponent. Trainer, he has good takedown defense, good jiu-jitsu, long limbs, makes it very difficult for him to complete takedowns or anybody complete takedowns. Dunlap is not really an aggressive striker. He's more of a counter striker, and Trainer, he's not really that aggressive either. He uses his reach in his striking, just not really to hurt his opponents, but just to make him think, I got to watch out for that strike coming at me before I even get close to him. And that should make for a boring fight, because if somebody's a counter striker and the other guy's not really looking to hurt you, this fight's probably going to take place in the clinch a little bit more. And Dunlap, that should favor him. It's going to keep the fight close. He's going to be able to get the fight to the ground. He doesn't really stay too busy in the clinch other than using his knees. And I feel that Trainer, he does stay busy on the outside with kicks. He doesn't throw high volume, but he does rip kicks to his opponent, whether it's to the body or to the leg. And in the eyes of the judges, that's going to look like damage, and that's going to look like somebody staying busy. So if he can keep this at distance, he's going to outwork Dunlap a little bit. And Dunlap, the way he's going to make this happen for himself is to take this fight to the mat. So I should take Dunlap because I feel that he's going to be in the clinch at some point. He's going to get this to the mat, but I don't think he's going to be able to keep Trainer down. And in space, when he's got a lot of room to work with, I think Trainer's going to use those kicks to keep Dunlap at his range and do some damage from there. I think the big fight experience is going to be a factor. This is going to be Dunlap's first time on a big card, where Trainer, he's been there before. He's fought some good fighters like Rob Wilkinson, surprisingly able to finish him too. So Luke Trainer to get this one done.
And next up at PFL Tampa, we've got Taila Santos taking on Sabrinna de Sousa. Sousa has been a nice prospect inside the PFL. She's got a very decorated amateur background, and she fights like she's got a ton of experience. Obviously, you see that 6-0 record, and you would look to think that she doesn't necessarily fight like a veteran, but because of all that amateur, kind of experience that she's gained, world champion over in the amateur circuit, she really fights like a true veteran, and she has a very nice striking game. She stays fundamental in the striking, nice kicks to the body, and she's really worked heavily on her grappling. You can see that in her previous 2 fights, especially against Wisnowski, where she did a good job being able to defend some of those takedowns and get some takedowns and throws of her own. And I think in this matchup that her takedown defense is going to be on full display here against Santos. Obviously, we know Santos coming from the UFC. She made a splash into the PFL. She did lose to Dakota, but at this point, who doesn't? And outside of that, she's had a lot of success. She was able to beat Liz Carmouche. She's got good grappling, good back takes. Coming off of that loss to Dakota, she was able to bounce back in her previous fight, getting a victory in the first round by a shot to the body. And I'd love to be able to see Taila Santos here really implement her grappling, and that's why I'm going to pick her in this matchup. I think Taila Santos here is going to be too much of a cut above and too much experience for Sousa. I think Santos is going to be able to get this fight to the ground. I think she's going to be the superior grappler, and I think that Sousa's ability to be able to defend on the ground is going to be enough in order to see the judges' scorecards. But I think on the feet, Santos is going to have enough to kind of get the respect of Sousa, and I think that that's going to kind of, give her something to think about, and that's when Santos is going to level change and duck underneath, get a body lock, trip, takedown, start, kind of playing with the feet in order to be able to get the fight to the ground. And I think that's where Santos is going to shine, getting the fight to the ground, controlling Sousa for long periods of this fight, and then ultimately landing some ground and pound, looking to fish for the rear naked choke, looking to take the back and kind of just dominate on the ground with heavy top control. And even though I do think Sousa is a real prospect, this is the kind of problem that you run into in the PFL, is that they don't have these big rosters where they can kind of wean up some of these, prospects up into the higher echelon of the division. And I think that this is too much too soon for Sousa. I would probably give her the edge in striking and her overall ability to stay technical on the feet, but I think in this matchup, it's not really going to matter too much because she's going to be so worried about the level changes of Santos. It's going to make it very difficult for her to really get her striking game going. And even if you look in her last fight against Bowers did a good job of being able to kind of get her worried about what was coming back at her on the feet and then level change and get that single leg that she got in the second round. And I could see Santos having much better control than Bowers and riding out a lot of long periods in this fight on top, landing ground and pound and giving the judges something to score on the ground. And the problem here for me is that even though I do think Sousa is a good prospect, I just don't think she's going to be able to piece it all together in time in order to beat somebody as good as Santos. So give me Taila Santos here to win this one by unanimous decision. I'm going to say that Sousa might even win a round, but I'm going to say Santos gets this one done 29-28. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
In this one, I'm going to have to go with Sabrinna de Sousa to get it done. And de Sousa, she has very good movement. Doesn't mix her strikes up too much. Has a very boxing-heavy approach. Uses her movement and stuffs takedowns very well. Good takedown defense, sprawls very well. I feel that based on her movement, striking, and volume, I have to go with de Sousa. And Santos, she's obviously more experienced. She's fought the better competition, and she's won in most of that. But she's a little slower, doesn't have the movement to match de Sousa. So the only way she's going to be able to slow her down is in the clinch or if she lands something heavy. And I don't think she's going to land anything heavy on de Sousa. I think de Sousa is too skilled in the stand-up to get something landed on her. And I feel that she's going to be able to stuff any takedown that Santos wants to throw at her. So Sabrinna de Sousa to get this one done.
And that brings us to the co-main event here for PFL Tampa. If you're enjoying the content, hit that like and subscribe button as we've got Gadzhi Rabadanov taking on Tracy Reader. Tracy Reader looks like a decent prospect on the regional scene, but the problem is he's fighting some very low-level guys. He does have nice fundamental striking. He keeps a nice tight high guard. And on the ground, he has excellent back takes, and he can really carve through people's guard. His ability to get to mount is very good. But the problem is here is that this is such a big step up on short notice against such an absolute killer that I don't see a way for him to pull this one off. Rabadanov, obviously, he does have power in the hands, and I do think that he fell in love with the power in his hands and his boxing a little bit too much in that Alfie Davis matchup, as he was knocking a lot of people out before that Alfie Davis matchup, and I would like to see him get back to the wrestling roots that he obviously had throughout the course of his career. And the problem here for Vieira is that when he's going to be worried about the takedowns, it's really going to open up the hands of Rabadanov, which carries a lot of power. He does a good job of disguising that right hand behind the jab, and I do think that once you start worrying about the power in the hands, that's when Rabadanov level changes on you and mixes up, the kind of utilizing that ground game and that wrestling. And the problem here for Vieira as well is that I don't necessarily trust his chin. 3 of his 5 losses have come via KO, TKO, and the power in Rabadanov's hands is definitely something he's going to be worried about coming into this matchup. So Rabadanov is really going to have to just have, whether it's on the feet or whether it's on the ground, the advantage. And I think Vieira is just going to be guessing between, 2 evils. Is he going to have to worry about the takedown? Is he going to have to worry about the right hand? And the problem is that once you're worried about the takedown and that right hand comes against a guy in Vieira that I don't trust his chin, I think it's going to spell a recipe for disaster. I think it's going to be a knockout here for Rabadanov. Give me Gadzhi Rabadanov here in this co-main event to find another knockout early in the first round. Let's see who Carlos has got in this matchup.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to go with Gadzhi Rabadanov to get it done. And I do think that Rabadanov is the better wrestler, even though Vieira does have good wrestling background and good collegiate wrestling background. He can stuff a couple takedowns, but I do feel that if Gadzhi chains together a few takedowns, he's going to get it, along with the fact that Vieira's going to have to look out for Gadzhi's left hook. He also uses his jab very nicely. He's dropped a few people with his jab. His striking has become a little bit more elite. Those are some things that Vieira's going to have to look out for. He's pretty much not on the level of Gadzhi Rabadanov. When it comes to striking, I think Gadzhi, he can hit hard. The one thing that Vieira does have is he's going to be the bigger fighter in this. So if he can impose his wrestling and try to use his size to kind of bully Rabadanov around the cage, he can do that. But I don't really see that happening. Gadzhi had a pretty good dance partner in this fight that had to pull out was Jakub Kazuba. And right now, Vieira's just filling in. He's not at the level of Rabadanov. So Gadzhi to get this one done.
And that brings us to the main event here for PFL Tampa. If you're enjoying the content, hit that like and subscribe button, as we've got Chris Cyborg taking on Ketlen Vieira. I got to go with Cyborg here in this one, but Vieira has played spoiler in the past. She is a very big, physically dominant fighter. She's got youth on her side, and I wouldn't be surprised if she comes in here and plays spoiler, and I'm going to explain why. Vieira is a fighter that on the feet, she can be a little bit plodding at times, and early she is very dangerous. She can hit very hard early. She does a good job of staying fundamental in the striking, pumping out the jab, and it's not a jab that's a rangefinder. It's really trying to hurt her opponent out at range with that stiff jab. She steps into it. She will land that right hand, but where she does her best work is in the grappling up against the fence. She wants to be able to bully you and really use her size. The problem is, in a 5-round fight, I don't necessarily see Vieira being able to have success in the later rounds, getting fights to the ground. She's kind of known as a fighter that's holding you up against the fence and the referee is having to kind of split you up. And the problem is here is that outside of Vieira having success early, I think it's going to be all Cyborg late. The problem is that when you look at the Cyborg side here, you've got a 41-year-old that's not extremely active inside of MMA. At some point, she is either going to get derailed, fall off of a cliff, or retire. So, when you've got retirement right around the corner at 41 years old, it kind of makes me worried about, a young up-and-coming hungry prospect that wants to make a splash over in her PFL debut that is, let's face it, a decent prospect even on the UFC circuit or the UFC promotion. So I just worry here that Cyborg is going to come in here and be a step slow, and Vieira is going to be able to take advantage of that. But there's no doubt in the striking that Chris Cyborg is the better striker. Obviously, in her last fight, she actually took a boxing match where she was able to get a 3rd-round stoppage, but she has that power in her hands. That's been her secret her whole career. She does hit very hard. She's got very nice boxing, and she's always had excellent takedown defense. And I think in this matchup here, it's going to serve her well to be really working on her cage work, because we know that Ketlen Vieira shines when she can get you up against the fence, throw a couple of shots, get you in the clinch, and start working her trip takedowns and really get on top and utilize her size. And I think if she is able to defend, especially early in the first round and a half of Ketlen Vieira's kind of onslaught up against the fence, I think that Cyborg can take over. She can throw to the body. She can pump out that jab. She can get ahead on the numbers. She can be the more technical striker. She can attack that low kick and really kind of, tread the tires of Ketlen Vieira, who's already very slow and plodding, in my opinion, especially on the feet. So I am going to lean to Cyborg here to get this one done. 29-2 is no joke. Obviously, most of those losses coming against people like Amanda Nunes as well. So no shame in those losses. But I do think when you look at that 41 years old, the lack of activity, the lack of competitive fights as well, when you put in somebody like Ketlen Vieira, it might be a shock to the system, and Ketlen Vieira might be able to play spoiler. But I think Cyborg here is going to defend the early onslaught, especially with the grappling and the wrestling, and get ahead on the judges' scorecards, especially with the striking. And I think Ketlen Vieira, she is pretty tough. She's not somebody I expect to kind of get taken out here. I think it's going to be Cyborg by decision. I think we're going to see her, kind of take off as the fight goes on, build into the fight as Ketlen Vieira kind of slows down as the fight goes on. Give me Chris Cyborg here to win by unanimous decision, taking over late, landing more shots, going to the body to really slow down the onslaught of Vieira as she gets tired. Let's see who Carlos has got in this main event.
Okay, in this one, I'm going to go with Chris Cyborg to get it done. And I think Cyborg's just the more technical fighter everywhere. I think she's definitely more well-rounded, more complete. I expect her to be the better striker. Last couple of years, she has been fighting in MMA, but taking more boxing matches, so I expect her striking to be sharp. I'm assuming her distance management is going to be sharp as well. She has good movement. Vieira, wrestling could be an issue. She's going to be able to get top control on Cyborg. That's going to be a problem. She's going to implement a lot of her ground and pound, and she does have some vicious ground and pound. But I do feel that Cyborg's not going to be an issue. She has good takedown defense. She can wrestle. She's been doing it for years. She's been grappling for years. It shouldn't be that big of an issue. Vieira not going to be able to pressure Cyborg enough like Larissa Pacheco did in their fight. She doesn't have that kind of caliber striking to be able to force Cyborg to have a real threat on the feet, so that takedowns are an issue. So, in my opinion, Cyborg's going to get this one done.
And there you have it, people. PFL Tampa in the books. If you're enjoying the content, hit that like and subscribe button. We've got UFC and PFL this week. Check out some of our other videos on the channel. We've got Dog of the Week. We've got Full Card Betting Guide. We've got the Cycle Parlay. We've got the Full Card Breakdown. You name it, we have it. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.